A mad villain cruising the neon-lit streets at night in his convertible, searching for a suitable specimen for his next deadly experiment. Driven mad by anger and jealousy, Dr. Orloff will sacrifice scores of innocent victims in his futile attempt to revive a comatose woman. Dr. Orloff's hulking, blind assistant kidnaps the unsuspecting women and brings them back to the secret lab. Things threaten to get out of hand when the older Dr. Orloff, himself guilty of countless cruel experiments, challenges his son to stop sacrificing innocent victims and accept the failure of his experiment. In The Sinister Dr. Orloff, Jess Franco gives us two mad doctors for the price of one.
Melissa, my child, just be patient a while longer. I'll save you, my dear. I shall make you just as beautiful as you were before.
Dr. Orloff, Franco's iconic villain who first terrified European filmgoers in 1962, returns 2 decades later in this strange and puzzling horror film, The Sinister Dr. Orloff. Now aged and wheelchair-bound, Dr. Orloff resides in a Spanish coastal town, with his son Albert carrying on his research into disintegration.
And then they say, "You're mad? Ah, you, Franco, always trying to do this funny and stupid things."
If you come into a film like The Sinister Dr. Orloff without any prior knowledge of how Jess Franco operates, you're in for a pretty rough landing. In order to appreciate a film like The Sinister Dr. Orloff, it's useful to have an idea of its unique background, the strange and singular circumstances under which it was conceived and shot. It's a project by an obsessive producer of images, made at a time when European B-movies were disappearing from screens. Jess Franco films are largely improvised and don't always abide by the technical or aesthetic standards deemed important by mainstream critics.
The cinema is a show. It must be a good show.
Although currently still mainly perceived as a bad and sleazy filmmaker, Jess Franco's stature has certainly grown in the 21st century, thanks to an increased availability of his more accomplished films on home video and streaming platforms. The complexity and variety of Franco's work sets him apart from most European exploitation filmmakers. Who was Jess Franco? A perennial outsider, a creative maverick for whom filming was everything. French director Alain Cavalier has referred to himself not as a traditional director but as filmeur, someone who films, who records footage. This term is equally applicable to Jess Franco, especially in the final third of his long and rocky career. Franco is someone who needs to film. He derives pleasure from the act of shooting. It's his life. As long as he's deeply physically involved in capturing images, life's good. His obsession with recording footage is way stronger than his urge to tell coherent stories, and he may well let the story, tension and drama fall by the wayside in the process of creating these mercurial images. He's not a crowd pleaser, but an obsessive, a film maniac. By the early 1980s, major blockbusters by Steven Spielberg and George Lucas have forever changed the face of commercial cinema. With the advent of home video and shrinking profit margins, the national genre cinemas of Spain, France and Italy were rapidly collapsing. Jess Franco must have been well aware of both the declining bankability of low-budget genre films and his own increasingly marginalized status within the industry. He must have to a large extent accepted that the chances of his return to a more mainstream career by this point were pretty slim. Yet there is no evidence that Jess Franco had any desire for wider acclaim. So Franco was probably relishing the long-desired creative freedom, and one last time dove headlong into making scores of tiny and uniquely strange films. The early 1980s see the emergence of a different kind of a Jasranko film, set in increasingly self-contained and self-referential world.
Dr. Alfred Orlov.
Seen from that perspective, it becomes easier to appreciate a film as threadbare and arid as the sinister Dr. Orlov. A highly visual film, the sinister Dr. Orlov is almost an experimental canvas for Jess's loving, roving, probing camera eye. It's also a virtual parade of all the corner-cutting techniques that come with attempting a sci-fi tinged horror on a schedule of about 5 days. I can just picture Jess knocking on his producer's door with a 2-page outline under his arm. He knows he can talk the producer into paying for X amount of film stock and get a minimum amount of shooting days allotted to a new project. The production costs are fixed, the cost tiny. These are the preset parameters. That's the location, we go roll cameras on Monday, and we have to shoot this many feet of film by Friday. Everything else, though, is left to be worked out along the way. So when I describe the sinister Dr. Orlov as experimental, it's this accidental quality I'm referring to. Some parameters are arbitrarily fixed, while others are left down to chance. In Jess's more successful experiments of this kind, a special, dreamlike atmosphere would be achieved, sometimes subtle, sometimes really strong. Due to the tightness of budget and schedule, narrative coherence or a strong forward drive would rarely be achieved. They weren't an important part of the original goal to begin with. Another parameter worth considering is Jess's whim, his creative inspiration, which counted for much in the self-perpetuating world of obscure underground cinema. His collaborators have reported him losing interest in a project halfway through and finishing it on cruise control while already setting up the next film, the next adventure. The sinister Dr. Orlov is a real head-scratcher of a film, coming from roughly the same period as Thong Girls. Both films share the same documentary-like cinema verite, grab the footage and run approach. Both films tell simplistic stories set in Spanish coastal towns and feature extensive filming in real streets and unsimulated environments, often with real passers-by captured staring right down the lens. But that's where the similarities end. In terms of mood and approach, the sinister Dr. Orlov is nearly the direct opposite of Thong Girls. Whereas Thong Girls is in many ways optimistic and mellow in tone, the sinister Dr. Orlov is decidedly morose and downbeat. Thong Girls can be enjoyed on its own merits and is a very audience-friendly affair, especially for a Jasranko film. The sinister Dr. Orlov is another story altogether. The sinister Dr. Orlov is a challenging film to review because it seems to have two conflicting identities, coming from an extremely busy period when budgets were as low as ever and creativity was unchecked. Franco was essentially given free rein within these minuscule budgets allotted to him by the producers. The sinister Dr. Orlov makes heavy use of tropes from earlier, canonical Franco films and is very self-referential. The technical merits of the sinister Dr. Orlov are solid, and the core idea is quite promising. But somewhere along the way, the film seems to falter. Franco's obviously keen to bring Dr. Orlov back for another round of villainy and pseudo-scientific experiments. Franco's insistence on doing away with the more traditional Gothic trappings, such as bat-infested crypts and crumbling castles, although understandable knowing the production circumstances, isn't entirely successful. The film feels a little forced, and execution seems less than enthusiastic. The chief problem lies not so much with the ridiculously low budget, as with the fact that Orlov belongs in Mitteleuropa. Take him out of there and he stops being Orlov, even if he does keep the same name and profession. It turns out that merely repeating plot elements from the original The Awful Dr. Orlov doesn't necessarily result in a valid new Orlov film. Franco has already rehashed the Awful Dr. Orlov plot a decade earlier in Jack the Ripper, resulting in a decent standalone film. The chief villain in Jack the Ripper is named Dennis Orloff, yet Jack the Ripper doesn't get included in the Dr. Orloff series. And perhaps there isn't really any coherent Dr. Orloff series, just a recurrent name. This spasmodic, erratic zoom we've come to associate with early 1970s Jess Franco is all but absent from the sinister Dr. Orloff, resulting in a much sharper, steadier and better exposed image, at least in the daytime scenes. The few available locations are always framed creatively and to their utmost advantage, with the famous El Xanadu complex from She Killed in Ecstasy making a welcome comeback. Strangely, this impressive technical proficiency doesn't directly translate into a superior film viewing experience. What the images have gained in clarity and stability seems to have come at the expense of the story, as the writing is as two-dimensional as ever, perhaps more. A number of key scenes in The Sinister Dr. Orloff are lifted almost verbatim from the awful Dr. Orloff. There is enough plot information, but the way this information is delivered is tell, don't show, which makes for a bizarre viewing. Franco seemingly working under an obligation to explicate, resulting in tons of routine exposition. And it's really not much fun to watch first-time actors saddled with pretty banal lines with no real conflict in their scenes. Franco keeps jumping between those dreamlike sequences nearly devoid of dialogue and drenched in a bizarre, improvised keyboard score, and mighty pedestrian exposition passages, seemingly talking down to the potential viewer. Another challenging aspect of the Sinister Dr. Orloff is that it seems to be madly in love with the trappings of the neo-Gothic, spiral staircases, and delightfully fake dials and knobs of Dr. Orloff's anachronistic lab equipment. The Sinister Dr. Orloff is one of those 1980s Jess Franco films which are nearly 100% shot in hotels. The interiors, whether it be a police station or a private apartment or a lab or an underground torture dungeon, are all largely and blatantly different spaces of hotels. The Sinister Dr. Orloff boasts two Jess Franco regulars, Howard Vernon and Antonio Mayans, playing father and son. Antonio Mayans as Alfred Orloff has taken over the evil experiments from his dad, who is now wheelchair-bound. The versatile Antonio Mayans plays the younger Dr. Orloff as this brooding macho with mummy and daddy issues and major anger at the world. A frustrated scientist who persists with these experiments which keep on failing. Similar to the original Orloff film, he picks up his victims mainly in nightclubs. The experiments involve transfusion of life essence between humans, very much in the vein of mumbo-jumbo pseudoscience previously seen in Dracula, Prisoner of Frankenstein. There is, as usual at this point, a very reduced cast of characters, but most supporting parts are weak and bland and inadequately performed. But they're also very poorly written. The Sinister Dr. Orloff is among the top 5 Jess Franco films with the worst music I can think of. The other contender would be Celestine with Lina Romay. The Sinister Dr. Orloff score, composed by Jess himself, isn't terribly good to begin with. But then Franco also applies it to scenes very generously and pretty indiscriminately, without much effort to really match or enhance the vibe of any particular scene. Post-production on The Sinister Dr. Orloff must have been neither long nor particularly elaborate. The most apt metaphor that comes to mind when trying to summarize The Sinister Dr. Orloff is somebody trying to hum a melody they haven't really heard or have thoroughly forgotten. It's an oddly paced film which promises a lot more than it ultimately delivers. Ostensibly a horror picture, The Sinister Dr. Orloff seems more at ease exploring the margins of its nominally horrific and mysterious plot, with its many extended scenes devoted to real-time documentation of minor events that barely just bring the story forward. The Orloff villain is back, but feels strangely out of place in the seaside town and almost irrelevant to the mood of the film. Judged against Franco's most celebrated works of the 1970s, a lot of his 1980s films can appear mercilessly padded, with way less recognizable narrative information per 10 minutes of footage, but also sadly somewhat less magic atmosphere. I'm sure some Franco fans will argue that the atmosphere in his 1980s period is perfectly fine, just different. The Sinister Dr. Orloff is somewhat of a work in progress, with better defined and more effective scenes given equal screen time to those that seem barely sketched out, so the overall effect is disconcerting and can be underwhelming. The Sinister Dr. Orloff is also a downbeat film dealing with fractured relationships. There is little in the way of joy or harmony, with unfulfilled characters wandering around the dark streets of the coastal town as if waiting to be handed freshly typed script pages. There is a strain of deep melancholy and despair running through the Sinister Dr. Orloff, which can be a real kick in the stomach for those who have come to associate Jess Franco with superficial and hedonistic scenarios of uninhibited sensuality set in tropical climes. A similar atmosphere of misery and frustration hangs over Jess Franco's earlier film Neurosis. Neurosis was Franco playing at German expressionism, albeit in color. A slow and downbeat film, Neurosis found no favor with the audiences at the time, and to this day hasn't gained many fans. In a way, Alfred Orloff's repeat attempts at reviving his mother mirror Franco himself, having a go at reviving a cinematic style dear to him but falling out of favor with the public. Just as Alfred Orloff's resources, time and effort bring a negligible result in the film, Franco's play at Mediterranean Gothic pays a rather small dividend in The Sinister Dr. Orloff. So this is why I call this period the Golden Crossroads. Offered a degree of stability and production money, Franco had two possible courses of action. Make story-based and conventionally good films, sort of like what he tried a couple of times in the 1970s with his Manacor films, or stay true to his mercurial nature and just amuse himself. I doubt if Franco hesitated long before settling into what was to become the last hugely prolific phase of his career. The sheer number and variety of films he pumped out between 1981 and 1984 is simply astonishing. It's literally scores of films, yet each one with its own distinct personality. These films share the same qualities which to a mainstream viewer will definitely register as flaws. They rarely catch any kind of emotional spark, they seem dilated in time with secondary strands of underdeveloped plots allowed to swallow up oodles of screen time without really getting anywhere, with each seat distended way beyond what's normally considered acceptable. The Sinister Dr. Orloff isn't unlike an early Fassbinder film with deliberate slowness and loveless, cruel characters wandering the night. Another reason why these 1980s films don't always connect with the viewer so well, they're almost too self-contained, so that there is a severely restricted number of elements being shuffled and reshuffled, the same familiar music pieces, cast and similar plots, with some of the films leaving the spectator feeling shortchanged. The problem with these Golden Films productions isn't just that there isn't enough money, it's more that Franco seemed to an extent unwilling or incapable of caring for these individual films long enough to give them substance. So these Golden Film productions appear almost translucent, rough sketches of films packaged as completed films. They're almost these whimsical daydreams hastily jotted down on a napkin and filmed directly afterwards, giving an impression of a hazy memory of a film rather than a complete new film. So it's a small miracle that they even got any kind of distribution. The Sinister Dr. Orloff is an idiosyncratic and uneven result of Jess Franco's playfully having a go at reviving a long-dead cinematic style. Whether the resulting film can be deemed valid depends very much on where you stand with regard to such aspects as production value, pacing, and good taste. It can be seen as a precursor to Jess Franco's experimental digital works of the late 1980s and the early 2000s, such as Lady Frankenstein with Lina Romay and Michelle Bauer. The Sinister Dr. Orloff may not have yet found its audience, but it has a strong enough identity and contains moments of quirky brilliance to hold its own among the colourful roster of Jess Franco's golden film productions.